The Demon of Florence, Chapter 2, Thunderbolt. It was the year 1512. The French army had made camp a few miles outside of the small city of Molinella. Tents, horses, cannons, and various provisions sprawled for what seemed like miles along the Italian countryside. Inside the tent of Gaston de Foix, the 21-year-old commander held court. The Thunderbolt of Italy, as he had commanded his men to call him, listened to the advice of his generals, although he didn't think much of their supposed counsel. He had won more victories in 2 years than any of them could have achieved in a lifetime. They contributed very little to the campaign, but the commander also knew that disaffected generals would not help him win this war. So he nodded and pretended to cogitate on their not-so-sage advice.
"We've taken Bologna. Venice should be next,"
said the stout, gruff General Bouton, who placed a small wooden figurine representing the French army down onto a map of Italy that was sprawled out over de Foix's table. The figurine now stood over Venice, and the other generals grunted in agreement. The tall, thinner General Valette interjected. "And with Venice conquered, the Holy Father will be forced to recognize King Louis as the rightful ruler of northern Italy." Valette thought he was smarter than all of the other generals, but de Foix saw his agreement as confirmation that Valette was merely a more articulate version of the troglodyte Bouton. Nevertheless, he was right about one thing. Pope Julius II had created a problem for the French army. 4 years ago, the Holy Father was fearful that the Venetians were becoming too powerful and too aggressive, so he had lured the French army into Italy to make war on the mercantile city-state. But the Pope got more than he bargained for. General de Foix had made such short work of the armies of Milan and Bologna that the Pope became fearful that France would betray him. So after initially declaring war on Venice, Julius had gone running to them a few months ago, begging for a new alliance. And instantly, the Thunderbolt went from being a soldier for Christ to an heretical outlaw. But the Thunderbolt didn't care. King Louis XII of France was pleased with de Foix's results, and he had promised the commander control of Milan for his heroic deeds. Once the northern Italian city-states were under the control of the French, the Holy Father might feel compelled to bless the new arrangement. However, de Foix secretly hoped that he wouldn't. The young commander secretly longed to march his army down to Rome. Julius II had betrayed de Foix personally, to say nothing of France herself. And that kind of betrayal required retribution.
"We can be at the gates of Venice in 3 days if we march at dawn. Victory is assured."
De Foix stared at the wooden trinket. He looked over and saw the other figurines that represented the armies of the Swiss, the Venetians, and the Papal States, along with those of the Spanish Naval Armada. Venice is so obvious, de Foix thought to himself. It was only logical that the Venetians called out to their Swiss and Spanish allies for reinforcements. Taking Venice would be difficult. He could do it, of course, but the losses would be heavy and the battle protracted. And he was not keen to lose the nickname Thunderbolt. His early victories had made his generals complacent, and now they were blinded by the potential spoils of war. De Foix picked the French figurine up from Venice. "Yes, General, you are correct. We will be assured victory. But not against Venice. Not today, anyway," he said as he placed the figurine down on another Italian coastal city, a city that offered no promise of glory or spoils. The generals all leaned in to see what other booby-prized de Foix was seeking to conquer. They were not pleased, and they began looking at de Foix with suspicion as they realized he had defeated their fantasies for an easy victory against Venice.
"Ravenna? Ravenna is useless."
Not to the papal armies. The Pope had stationed several garrisons at the small port town of Ravenna. This garrison potentially posed a threat when combined with the Spanish Navy, which had also been stationed there. But de Foix was willing to gamble that the navy had set sail for Venice, expecting a battle to ensue there. Ravenna would be virtually defenseless, meaning he could strike a profound blow against the papal armies. De Foix explained his reasoning to his generals, but they remained skeptical. Now they doubt the wisdom of the Thunderbolt, de Foix thought to himself. But he also wondered whether attacking the armies of the Pope caused his generals consternation. "What's the matter, General? Are you afraid to defend King Louis against the papal armies?" De Foix realized that ignoring the distant decrees of the Holy Father was one thing, but destroying his armies was quite another. But as the generals bickered, most of the French army slept. Some drank, some invited ladies of the evening into their tents. But at the southern entrance of the camp, two lowly guards, Maurice and Antoine, stood watch.
"Oi, Antoine, do you think the Venetian girls be prettier than the ones at Bologna?"
"I heard Venice is women from every port in the world."
"That doesn't mean they have better tits. Did you see that Sophia? Oh, magnifique."
But as Maurice began recounting his romp with the Bolognese prostitute, Antoine noticed a hooded figure approaching on foot. The figure's pace was slow, and he carried no banner.
"Probably a beggar."
"Stop! Who goes there?"
The figure said nothing, but continued walking towards the guards.
"What's your business?"
"If you're looking for free food, dégage-toi."
The guards looked at each other, unsure of what to do next. The hooded figure did not respond, but continued the approach. Instinctively, they both pointed their spears towards the stranger.
"Halt!"
"We're warning you."
The hooded figure looked up, revealing a mask of gold. The stranger drew a dagger. It was long and bejeweled, but it was no match for two spears, to say nothing of an army.
"I'm warning you, this is your last chance. Turn away."
But the hooded stranger's pace began to quicken. Maurice looked down and saw the horn tied to his waist. He reached for it, but he couldn't untie the knot without dropping his spear. The stranger was only a few meters away, but getting closer, dagger ready. Maurice tucked the spear under his armpit and pulled at the knot at his waist. It came loose, and he put the horn up to his lips. It took a moment for Maurice to deduce that he had been struck with the blade, right in the heart. Antoine watched as his comrade fell to his knees, and then to the ground. Instinct took over, and Antoine lunged at the hooded stranger.
Ah!
The assassin spun around, dodging the spear with ease. Antoine ran right past him. He turned around, and again thrust his spear, but again it missed. Antoine swung his spear like an axe, hoping to knock the intruder over. But the assassin jumped. High into the air, higher than anything the soldier had ever seen. The stranger twirled in the air, the long cape flowing out in the wind like wings. And Antoine saw something incredible. A long blue tail, spinning with the rest of the figure. Antoine swung his spear again, upward, but again he missed. And he watched the hooded figure, blue tail and all, fall slowly back to the ground. The hooded assassin was now standing over Maurice's body. The light from the nearby torches made the golden mask glow in the night. The mask had no expression, but it was almost taunting Antoine. "What are you?" The assassin reached down and removed the dagger from Maurice's body. Antoine readied his spear for another attack, but the assassin jumped. And in the blink of an eye, the golden mask went from being 2 meters away to being practically on top of him. He felt the dagger enter his chest. Pain went through his body. His heart began racing. He clutched his chest as the assassin removed the dagger. Antoine fell to the ground. His breathing was labored. His heart was racing. He could feel the world spinning and then going dark. As he lay dying on the ground, his last sight on earth was the blue tail, slithering behind the assassin's long robe, like a serpent making its way into the French encampment.
Generals, my decision has been made.
And what if the Spanish Navy is still there?
Then they'll watch their friends die from the safety of their ships.
But Commander,
They would be fools to face us on an open battlefield.
De Foix didn't know if General Valette actually agreed with his plan, or was merely trying to ingratiate himself at the expense of Bouton.
Commander! Commander!
De Foix's squire, Alain, hurried in out of breath.
What is it?
2 guards at the south entrance were found dead. Murdered.
an assassin?
The Venetians, no doubt. It appears they brought the battle to us.
Sending assassins was low, even for the Venetians. But now was not the time for debate. The young commander sprung into action.
General Bouton, ready the vanguard. There may be an army approaching. General Valette, ready the archers and the cannons. Alain, sound the alarm and fetch me my armor.
The generals scattered. Men cried out in the distance, waking their comrades. Horns could be heard in the distance. De Foix ran to the southern entrance of the camp and consulted with the other soldiers. No one had seen or heard anything specific, much to his annoyance.
Now I know how the Bolognese commander felt right before I took his city.
De Foix ordered scouts to immediately fan out and begin searching for approaching armies in various directions. De Foix knew that any scout that didn't return signaled an army was approaching. As he walked around the camp, too many of his men were still asleep.
To arms, men! To arms!
De Foix raced back to his own tent to suit up. But he heard a scream and saw that it came from the tent of General Bouton. He ran inside and saw Bouton laying on the ground. De Foix knelt down to see what had happened.
Bouton, you all right?
But De Foix realized there was nothing he could do. Blood was streaming out from a cut along Bouton's throat. The general could not speak. He pointed eastward. He tried to utter something, but the words could not escape his throat. He gasped a few times as the life drained out of his body. De Foix could feel the rage build within him. He ran out of the tent and grabbed the nearest soldier.
Spread the word. There's an assassin in the camp. Arrest anyone who doesn't wear our uniform.
But De Foix knew that many of his troops were still asleep or were still in the process of getting ready. It would be hours before he could do a thorough search of the entire camp. By that point, the assassin could have killed any number of his people. But killing a dozen men wouldn't put a dent in his army, which boasted 20,000 soldiers. He's not intending to murder the whole army. Only me. De Foix cursed himself for ordering his subordinates to spread such wild rumors about his conquests. His intent was to frighten other armies into submission. But the rumors had worked. Naples and Genoa had stayed neutral throughout his campaign through Italy. But he'd also painted a target on his back. De Foix instantly realized he was unarmed. His squire Alain had taken his armor and sword to the blacksmith for repairs.
Where is that useless brat?
De Foix turned to a nearby infantryman.
You, with me.
De Foix didn't explain anything to the soldier. He didn't want to appear cowardly, but he needed guards. He dismissed the pangs of fear that were creeping into his head. He justified his sudden need for nearby guards by telling himself that he knew he could take any mercenary in a fair fight. But the Venetians wouldn't have hired a mercenary to fight honorably. They were playing to win, by any means necessary.
Ow!
De Foix's internal deliberations were interrupted yet again. He and the infantryman ran into another nearby tent.
Mercenary dog!
But De Foix found no assassin in the tent. Just an older lieutenant and a young woman. Both naked and now caught in flagrante delicto. The infantryman began to giggle. De Foix threw him an icy glare, which shut him up. He looked back at the lieutenant, who was now clearly embarrassed that his screams had inadvertently summoned the army's commander.
The wench threw my back out!
The woman shrugged as if to say, I was only doing my job. De Foix shook his head and turned and left.
Find General Valette and have him report to my tent at once.
But give me your sword, soldier. The soldier handed over his sword and departed. De Foix swung the sword a few times, readying for a fight. He approached his tent with caution. He could hear men scurrying around him, but none were nearby. He entered his tent cautiously, holding his sword tightly. But he only saw Alain, sitting at the table next to the large map of Italy. "Alain, my armor?" But the squire remained still. "Alain?" De Foix touched the boy's shoulder, but his squire fell over to the ground. "Alain!" The boy was dead. De Foix instinctively began looking for puncture wounds, but there were none. No blood. De Foix looked around for the assassin. He saw an expressionless golden mask in the corner staring back at him. "You treacherous dog! You'll pay for what you've done tonight!" De Foix saw that the hooded assassin was holding out the small figurine representing his army, holding it with a freakishly large glove. The assassin flicked the figurine across the room at the commander. De Foix dodged, and the wooden trinket landed on the dead squire. "Calm yourself, Gaston. He's trying to goad you into doing something rash," De Foix thought to himself. "My guards will be here any moment."
You can scream for them if you want, but it wouldn't be very thunderous, would it?
De Foix knew the assassin was playing to his vanity, and that voice was undoubtedly female. But that female had murdered one of his generals, and who knows how many others. The smart thing was to play for time. "Who sent you? The Venetians? The Swiss? Pope Julius himself? They're all going to pay after tonight."
I rarely say this, human, but you underestimate your value.
"I'm not going anywhere." De Foix readied his sword. The assassin pulled out her dagger. De Foix relaxed his knees, shifted his weight from side to side, readying to dodge a flying blade. But to his surprise, she dropped the dagger to the ground. With her large hands, she gestured for De Foix to come to her. "Arrogant witch!" De Foix lunged at the assassin, swinging his sword. But she was fast. She dodged every swing. His sword collided with plates, chairs, wooden beams, but he couldn't strike this woman. "Are you afraid to face me?" The assassin cocked her head to one side. Again, her large hands gestured for De Foix to come to her, taunting him. De Foix raised his sword, but the assassin did not budge. He brought the blade down as hard as he could. De Foix felt the blade strike, but he was stunned. It hadn't cut into her body, but only her hand. She was gripping the sword's blade in her hand. He leaned and pressed forward, trying to cut through her, but he couldn't. Her grip was too strong. He saw blood ooze from the glove. He pressed and pulled, but she had his blade firmly in her large grasp. De Foix stared into the golden mask, trying to make out what kind of woman could do all this. He heard the next blow before he felt it. Some sort of thick whip had whirled through the air and struck him in the chest. The commander hadn't seen anything coming, but nevertheless, the impact with the ground had proved he had indeed been hit. The fall knocked the wind out of him, but he maintained an iron grip on his sword. The female assassin leapt towards him. De Foix thought he saw a streak of blue come from under the assassin's robe, barreling towards him. De Foix thrust his sword towards the flying assassin, and this time, he heard the blade pierce her flesh. She crashed on top of him, but he kept pressing his sword into her torso. He felt the weight of her body pressing on top of him, pinning him down. But De Foix kept pressing until he felt the assassin's body go limp. All was silent inside the tent, but he was pinned down. He tried to move, but couldn't. This wench weighs a ton! He pushed and pulled, but he couldn't move the assassin's body off of him. His waist and legs were completely pinned down. He exhaled and debated whether to scream for help, but all remained still. He looked up and stared at the golden mask, and if he didn't know better, he would have thought the mask was still taunting him. He could see his reflection in the mask, and he appeared to not have any major wounds. Not on his head, anyway. And as he looked into the golden mask, he wondered what the face of this woman would look like. He surmised that only a hideous woman could have that kind of strength and such large hands. But he wanted to see for himself. He reached up towards the golden mask, curious to look upon the assassin who almost killed him. But as his fingers pressed the gold, a glimmer of red emanated from the mask's eye holes. He yanked his hand away and immediately thrust his sword deeper into the assassin. But he could feel the sword's handle hit her torso. The sword was almost completely through her. The glowing red eyes faded out again, but before de Foix could assess whether she was truly dead, he had a loud swoop and felt a gust of wind blow against his sweat-drenched face. He looked up and saw 2 demonic wings emerging from the assassin's cloak, stretching to the top of the tent. The head of the assassin raised up and leaned towards him.
Ironic, but one of the most intimate acts of our bodies is death.
De Foix pressed his sword a final time, but to no avail. In panic, he began punching and shoving the assassin, but still he was pinned down. He tried kicking, but his legs wouldn't move. One of the assassin's hands raised up into the air. De Foix instinctively turned his face away and braced himself for the strike. But the hand instead reached up towards the golden mask, unfastened it, and pulled it away. De Foix was nearly blinded by the full force of the glowing red eyes, and he could barely make out the assassin's face, but he knew what he was looking at was not human.
And wings of fear shall touch the sun.
The wings flapped, and again, de Foix could feel a gust of wind wash over him. He tried to scream, but the wings descended upon him before the cry could leave his throat. The wings enveloped him, pierced him, and delivered him on his way to oblivion. This has been The Demon of Florence by Andrew L. Productions. It was performed by Elliot Crossley with the voice talents of Daisy Mae Parsons. We hope you've enjoyed this broadcast.